This lecture is focused on the two major democratic models that we need to know for our AP exam, but more importantly, understanding who influences government, who makes the government make decisions. And so using the majoritarian and the pluralist democratic models, we can better understand where does the power lie. To start off, we want to talk about the majoritarian model. And before we even talk about the majoritarian model, we need to understand that with the majoritarian model, the key part of majoritarian is majority. The idea that the majority is the group that always speaks, and the government will always listen to the majority. That government by the people means the majority. That if you are able to earn greater than 51% of the vote, then your decision should be the one that is made, that your influence should be the most powerful. And this attempts to allow people to participate in government with limitations of representative government. This idea that people can participate, they can vote for certain representatives in office, for their congressperson, for a senator, for president, that we, the people, have the ability to influence decision makers. The primary mechanism for democratic government with the majoritarian model is the popular election. We have elections all the time. Every 4 years, we have a presidential election. Every 2 years, we vote for congresspeople and senators. Every year, you're going to see examples of primary elections. You're going to see example of local elections, state elections. There are elections all the time. And it's the election that allows the people to make their voices heard. In theory, citizens control their representatives by choosing them. That the threat of losing your job as a congressperson or a senator can make you listen to the majority. That's really, really an important force. That we view elections as opportunities to decide government policies. This could be indirectly through our representative democracy, the idea that we vote for our congresspeople and senators and they make decisions based on what we want. But sometimes we even vote for actual laws. We actually vote for policies, particularly and more regularly at the local and state levels than we do at the federal level. Examples of voting for actual policies or changes by the actual people and not through our representatives would be through the referendum and the initiative. A referendum is an election on a policy issue already voted by the legislature. For example, the minimum wage, bear bait. So we can see examples of what can we use, what should be allowed to bait bears. But more importantly, we could argue with the minimum wage is, should we increase the minimum wage? Should people making minimum wage, should they earn some kind of pay hike? The idea that we want to make sure that people who are living on minimum wage are able to survive. And a referendum is where you take a law that already exists and the people make direct changes through it. There's a process to make this happen. There's petitions, there's signatures that are needed. But in the end, you're actually able to make these changes and put them on a ballot where the people make the decision and not representatives. We also have initiatives where the voters petition to place an issue on the ballot. Bond levies is probably the most common example. The idea that we're going to maybe increase taxes or we're going to raise money to pay for a certain thing, a park. We're going to raise money in order to build a new school or update the school system. Levies are often done at the local level, and they're done often. Again, this is an example where the people make direct policy choices. The majoritarian makes a key assumption that if you are a supporter of the majoritarian model, if you believe that is the model that the United States follows, then there's certain things that follow that. The first is that citizens are knowledgeable about government and politics, that people who are voting for their officials, that we know that research has been done. We know that they're making choices that are educated, that they're knowledgeable in the processes and how government works at the local, state, and federal level. That people want to participate and will make rational decisions for elected representatives. There's a controversy. Some people will make the argument that we need to make voting compulsory. The idea that we're going to make it mandatory. By law, you have to vote. Other people say, we don't want that to occur. We don't want everyone to have to vote, because that means when people have to vote, they'll do it and they're not going to make good, rational, educated choices. In terms of the United States, less than 30% claim to know what is going on daily politics. Where is the knowledgeable majority? Where are the people who know what's going on? For the most part, people, in quotes, don't know what's going on, that maybe they're not as educated in terms of the happenings of politics. And oftentimes we use commercials, we use advertisements, we use snippets on the news to directly affect our decision making, as opposed to a holistic understanding of the process. On the other side, you have a pluralist model, and pluralism is defined as the modern society consists of groups sharing economic, religious, ethnic, and cultural values. At times, these various groups seek to influence government. Religious groups are going to try their best to influence government. You'll see situations where economic groups are going to try to influence government. Groups that are based on cultural values, that they have these small issues, but major issue in their eyes, that they're going to try to influence government in their way. And so we interpret this by the government, by the people, to mean people operating through competing interest groups. This idea that interest groups are able to speak for the people better than one individual person themselves. If you only have one vote, then you can only influence the government by that one vote. But if you join an interest group, if you join a union, if you join any trade organizations, that your dues can go towards the lobbying or the influencing of representatives, and that your voice can be heard in a much stronger capacity through that interest group, as opposed to just your one vote. There's two key mechanisms to the pluralist model. And the first, and that was already mentioned, are interest groups. This idea that there are these groups that exist that are only there to voice their opinions to the government. And oftentimes interest groups focus on very narrow interests. We also see a decentralized structure of government open to the influence of citizens. Therefore, competing groups have access. And even though we have a strong central government in the federal level, there are different capacities in which that government can be influenced. Individual senators, individual congresspeople. We have the entire bureaucracy can be influenced through interest groups. The Department of the Department of Defense, the Department of Education, the Department of Transportation. All of these areas are able to be influenced by interest groups. Well, we can kind of ask the question, well, what are some examples of interest groups? An interest group is an organized group of individuals seeking to influence a specific public policy. Interest groups are not concerned about getting people elected. Interest groups are concerned about getting policies passed. Examples of this would be the NRA, the National Rifle Association, where their key issue is the Second Amendment, to limit limits on gun ownership, to make sure that we don't limit the ability for people to own a firearm. The National Organization for Women, who are focusing on issues for women, issues in feminism, the issues in pay, issues in maternity leave, if you have a child, things like that. The NEA, the National Education Association, where teachers and school systems are able to influence the government. And the National Farmers Union, the idea that farmers don't want to be left behind. There are fewer farmers today than there were yesterday, and then a few years ago, and 20 years ago, and 30 years ago. So the National Farmers Union will use this interest group as a way to influence policy. And according to the pluralist model, democracy exists when many organizations separate from government and try to influence the government. That this is important, that your voice actually can be heard better when you use an interest group to kind of voice your opinion. And that political scientists closely affiliated with the pluralist model, an example would be Robert Dahl. And this person argues that pluralism allows for greater involvement by minorities, that with a majoritarian form of government, that if you're not in the majority, then your voice cannot be heard. That if you're not in the majority in opinion, then you're not going to get what you want. You're not going to be able to influence policy. And so when we talk about minorities, we're not talking about necessarily about ethnicity or race. We're talking about a minority opinion, maybe an opinion that is not as strong or not as widespread as the majority. And then you could even argue that minority groups run the country. The idea that the majority does not run the country, even though a majoritarian would say that they should, that some would argue that these interest groups actually influence government more so than the people's actual votes and their voice. That money in politics is more influential than people's votes and people's opinions on certain policies, which leads to certain kind of questions. And how should we view America and the model of democracy? Should we strive to be more of a majoritarian model, or do you think we should strive to be more of a pluralist? What can we do to find a balance? Are there any types of decisions or structures in the governments in making sure that we listen to the minority opinions, but at the same time we value the key ideas of democracy, that majority rules? So consider those questions because we will be having a greater discussion regarding